So Sera Abbott came to see me and requested me to have the opening ceremony of this debate in Courtyard, and he was requesting me some big teaching. I told him, as I'm aging, I feel tired to give long teachings, and therefore I told him clearly that I cannot give a long teaching, but I will give teaching on the praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent arising. As everyone knows, as I said before, the Buddha Shakyamuni was a unique teacher amongst the different founding teachers of religious traditions. You cannot demand. So I can say no to you. So I prefer to use Buddhist philosophy rather than religion. Of course, there are many different religious traditions in the world. So, lightly speaking, of course, these also are religious traditions. And all the religious traditions they have the same message, that is love and compassion. And in the process of developing love and compassion, there is also the practices of tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, and self-discipline. In the case of, for example, the Christianity, the practitioners are very contented and live a very simple life. So they seem to be more contented than the Tibetan Buddhist monks sometimes. So of course there are bad people in the other religious traditions, but there are very sincere practitioners in Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and so forth. So they live a very simple life, contented. I would like to tell this story. One time I was in Barcelona at a Christian monastery in Montserrat, and behind the hill, behind the monastery, there is a hill, and I heard from the organizers that one of the Catholic practitioners wanted to see me. And so when I saw that person, and I said, of course, I would like to see him. And when we met, I told this Christian practitioner that I heard you have been meditating behind this monastery up in the hills with very little proper food, except for some tea and bread. So what have you been meditating on for those 5 years? And he told me, I practice love. So when he said that, in his eyes there was a special kind of glittering. So I felt very inspired by his expression. And so all the major religious traditions have the practice of love and compassion. The difference lies in philosophical ideas and concepts. So this difference, according to, is necessary in accordance with the different mental dispositions of different people. So the Buddha himself also taught, although he was the same teacher, he also taught different philosophical concepts. And therefore, as we all know, in Buddhism there are the philosophical teachings or philosophical schools of Bhashika, Sautantika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamakas. So this shows the necessity of the different philosophical traditions. So within the religious traditions, there are those traditions which believe in a creator God and those that do not believe in a creator God. So philosophical, there are differences amongst the religions. So those religions which are based mainly on faith have difficulty having discussions and dialogues with science and scientists, whereas we, the followers of the Buddhist philosophical tradition, are able to have discussions with the scientists. So from the Buddhist point of view, the Buddha was a supreme nirmanakaya, or emanation form of the body of Buddha. But on one aspect of the Buddha is a philosopher. And regarding quantum physics, the concept itself was already taught by the Buddha. It's not something that I made up. But there was an Indian nuclear physicist, Rajaramana, and when I met him, he told me that quantum physics is something new in the Western world, a new concept, whereas this concept already existed in India over 2,000 years ago, because he said that he found this concept in Master Nagarjuna's writing, where Nagarjuna mentions things have no essential independent objective existence. So the Buddha, on the one hand, was a philosopher, a thinker, and on the other hand, secondly, the Buddha didn't give priority to faith alone, but he preferred reasoning. So when your practice of principles are supported by reason, using our intelligence, it's going to be powerful. So when we use intelligence, we are doing analysis into the nature of things and so forth. And so we are not satisfied with whatever others say or what the scriptures say. So using reason helps to develop our intelligence and wisdom further. Without it, mere faith will not make us grow in our understanding. And therefore, the Buddha emphasized using intelligence, the perfection of in the Kanjur collection of the Buddha's words. There is a collection called the perfection of wisdom, and so these sutras are named after wisdom and not other perfections. And so Buddha's religion is a religion which considers wisdom or intelligence as the primary factor for understanding the. So I already mentioned this to the Indian Jagat Gurus. So when we examine things, reality and the teaching and so forth, by using reason, then we will be able to see the reality clearer, and therefore, as we grow in our understanding of the reality, we would be able to gain deeper understanding of selflessness and Tsongkhapa has said that we cannot, consider reliable some teachings which are against reason. And so I have, because of the emphasis on reason and understanding of philosophy and so forth, in our Tibetan secular schools, usually, in the past we had teachers of religion, but I recently told people that our people that we should change the name from religious instructor to philosophy teacher. So within Buddhism itself, we have the different philosophical systems, and amongst all these philosophical systems, with regard to them, the Buddha in his first sermon, the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, which are on the basis of the Pali tradition. And then the second sermon, or the turning of the wheel of Dharma, during that, Buddha gave teaching on the perfection of wisdom. And so wisdom or intelligence is emphasized in this tradition, in the Sanskrit tradition. So that this text, called In Praise of Dependent Origination, praises the Buddha to be an excellent teacher for using reasoning and developing our wisdom. So in the process of studying about the deeper reality of things, we need first to engage in the practice. We need first to study. And we should learn about the different philosophical systems, and then understand what are the reasons that are used to prove the theses that are asserted by the different philosophical schools. And within Madhyamaka also, we need to see the reasons for asserting certain theses. So we should not just follow one scripture, but we need to, if we are able to see different writings, different literature, then we will be able to see which one has the ultimate kind of reason, which gives a true conviction in the teaching, in the reality of things. And once you have ascertained the reality through reason, then you need to gain conviction, and that conviction has to be used to familiarize our mind in meditation. So the perfection of wisdom teachings are the main teaching of the Buddha, which teaches, and these sutras teach emptiness or selflessness. So as the reasoning for establishing emptiness, we have dependent origination. So when we talk about dependent origination, dependence shows that things are dependent on other factors. If things were to exist independently, objectively, then they cannot depend on other factors. So I think it would be good for me to put on this hat and to give teaching on emptiness, otherwise I'm feeling cold. So dependence shows relativity, which means that an existence of something can be posited only in connection or in dependence on another factor, other factors. So as long as things are dependent, there cannot be independent. And so dependence shows that things are empty of any intrinsic existence, and arising shows that things are conventional. I mean, the conventionality of things are not rejected. So when we say things are devoid of any independent essential existence, therefore we can say that things are dependently arisen. So although there are many different reasonings that are used, such as the diamond splinter and the lack of one and many and so forth, the reasoning of dependent arising or dependent origination is said to be the king of reasoning to demonstrate or prove emptiness, that things are without any independent existence. And therefore the Buddha's teaching is seen to be a reliable and authoritative one. So dependent arising has the power to dispel both the extreme of eternalism and extreme of nihilism, with one reasoning, that is dependent origination. And so Master Nagarjuna says that what is dependently arisen, what arises dependent is said to be an empty, and that itself is designated, and that is the middle way. What is that? Since things, there is nothing which is dependent, therefore there's nothing, there is not empty. So if you study Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the wisdom verse, fundamental wisdom verses of the middle way by Nagarjuna, you will understand how things are empty of any inherent existence while being conventionally and dependent. So of course when we look at a flower, I mean when we ask where is a flower, we may point to a flower. There is a flower there. But when we look at a flower, it appears that the flower exists from its own side, objectively. So this is what we would call that of the object to be negated in establishing emptiness. So regarding the identification of this object to be negated, I mean it's very explained in great detail how we should not confuse the actual object of negation. So the purpose of the reason why the Buddha taught emptiness is to overcome our suffering, and suffering is rooted in ignorance, and therefore we need to develop a wisdom which goes diametrically opposite to that of the ignorance which grasps at some kind of independent existence in things, objective independent existence, and therefore all the teachings of the Buddha are, flow from the understanding of dependent origination. So, of course, this reality of dependent origination is not easy to understand. Rinpoche, Tsongkhapa himself, in his earlier part of his life, when he wrote the Garland of Golden Rosary, which is a commentary on Abhisamaya Lamkara, and also his praise of the Bodhisattva, the always crying Bodhisattva, and his understanding of, if you read these books, you will see that Rinpoche Tsongkhapa had not yet arrived at the final understanding of emptiness. But in his later writings, so of course, he found that although things are dependently designated, but yet he was not able to see that, understand that things are devoid of any intrinsic existence. And then later, when he put into practice the teaching in meditation and in retreat, he was able to gain true insight into this emptiness. And then he composed this text in Praise of Dependent Origination. So regarding the transmission of this, it was rare in the central part of Tibet in those days when I received it. I received it from the Kinori Lama Genrinzin Tempa, and he had received it from Khangsar Dojichang in Tibet. So Namo Guru Manchu Gokaya is homage to Manjushri. And then the text gives certain verses from Mula Madhyamaka Karika, these verses of salutation from Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which praises the Buddha for teaching dependent origination, free from 8 extremes. So if you look at the matter, of course, if you scrutinize their nature and reality, you'll find that nothing can be pointed as being this or that. So there is the Buddha is praised from the point of view of so things have no coming, going, or cessation and arising, permanence and annihilation and so forth. If you actually check into their nature, so he who speaks on the basis of seeing it, this makes him a knower and a teacher unexcelled. So the reason why the Buddha has become an unexcelled knower and unexcelled teacher is because of his understanding of dependent origination. Whatever degeneration or misfortune there are in the world, the root of all this is ignorance. So when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, And he taught, elaborated the first two noble truths, and the noble truth of suffering and the true origin. And he taught the 12 links of dependent origination. So the first of that link, 12 links, is ignorance. And so you taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So if you understand dependent arising well, it is said that you will be able to do away with both the extremes of nihilism and permanence, so that you are able to actually pierce through this illusion where things appear to have some kind of independent objective existence that will be done away with. So how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? This being so, who will find, O Savior, a more wonderful way to praise you than to praise you for having taught the dependent origination through dependence? Whatever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence. So the Buddha, in the sutra, it is said that so what arises through conditions has no birth, and so forth is taught by the Buddha. So there are philosophical systems which say that things arise through dependence on their causes and conditions. Therefore, there are the causes and conditions objectively which gives rise to their results. So, of course, the results are dependent on their causes. Even the birds and animals know that certain fruits arises through their causes. So in relation to something that is given rise to, we talk about a cause. Because that is there are factors which give rise to their effects. We call them a cause, and those things which are given rise to are the results. And so the cause, even the cause, is said to be dependent on its result. The result may yet to arise, but because some result would arise, we call something a cause of that result. Although the result comes later. So whatever we talk about, whether multiple and singularity or cause and effect and so forth, everything should be asserted in relation or in connection with the other. Then, being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid functions do not contradict, whereas when one sees the opposite, since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has functions, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. Therefore, your teaching, seeing dependent origination, is hailed, that too not as an utter non-existent, nor as an intrinsic existent. So the Buddha is praised to be the one who is the teacher, the teacher and wondrous refuge. And so on the basis of understanding the causality, law of causality, we can create the causes for higher rebirth, and also, which is a temporary goal that we seek to attain. And the final ultimate goal is that of enlightenment or liberation, which comes through, again, understanding that things are dependent. To help heal sentient beings, or benefactor, you taught the peerless reason to ascertain emptiness, the heart of the teaching. This is why dependent origination, those who perceive it as a contradictory or as unestablished, how can they comprehend your system? So for those of the realists within Buddhist tradition, using the reason that things are dependent and therefore they are without any intrinsic existence is a contradictory reason. And then for non-Buddhist traditions who do not accept the dependence of things as such, this reason could be unestablished reason. For you, when one sees emptiness in terms of the meaning of dependent origination, then being devoid of since there is no, in terms of meaning of dependent origination, then being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid functions do not contradict. Whereas when one sees the opposite, since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has function, one falls into the dreadful abyss. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed, that too, not as an utter non-existent, nor as an intrinsic existence. Verse number 19. So verse number 18 says that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising independent of that. What need is there to say that these two converge without conflict? So Ngodrup Chognye was very fond of this text, and he says that this verse number 19, it is through the reason of dependent origination that one does not lean towards an extreme. That you have declared this excellently is the reason, O Savior, of your being an unexcelled teacher. All of this is devoid of essence, and from this arises that effect. These two certainties complement each other with no contradiction at all. So, because the Buddha was someone who taught dependent origination from his own experience, it is said that there's praising him on the basis of teaching dependent origination is a true praise. Of course, there could be praises to the Buddha from the point of view of his excellent body physical marks, major and minor marks, or showing miracles and so forth. So the unique teaching of the Buddha is that things have no intrinsic or independent existence because they are dependently arisen, which is not found in any other tradition. So what is more amazing than this? What is more marvelous than this? If one praises you in this manner, this is real praise, otherwise not, being enslaved by ignorance, those who fiercely oppose you. What is so astonishing about their being unable to bear the sound of no intrinsic existence, but having accepted dependent origination, the precious treasure of your speech, then not tolerating the roar of emptiness? This I find amazing indeed. So those philosophical traditions which do not assert dependent origination and say that there is a permanent single autonomous soul, and also asserting a creator God. I mean, for them not to accept that things are not dependently arisen is not so amazing. But those traditions of which follow your teaching and say that having accepted that things have dependently originated, yet not tolerating the roar of emptiness, this is indeed what I find amazing. The door that leads to no intrinsic existence, this unexalted door of dependent origination, through its name alone, if one grasps at a true intrinsic existence, now this person who lacks the unrivaled entrance, who have well traveled by the noble ones, by what means should one guide him to the unexalted path that pleases you? Intrinsic nature, uncreated and non-contingent, dependent origination, contingent and created. How can these two converge upon a single basis without contradiction? Therefore, whatever originated dependently, though primarily free of intrinsic existence, appears as if it does possess intrinsic existence. So you taught all this to be illusion-like. You who speak excellently by seeing as it is, for those who train in your footsteps, all degenerations will become remote, for the root of all faults will be undone. But those who turn away from your teaching, though they may struggle with hardship for a long time, faults increase evermore as if being called forth, for they make firm the view of self. When the wise comprehend the differences between these two, why would they not at that point revere you from the depths of their being, let alone your numerous teachings, even in the meaning of a small part, those who find ascertainment in a cursory way, this brings supreme bliss to them as well. So with regard to dependent origination, I have found that scientists also appreciate and admire this. And I have asked scientists whether you have this concept of dependent origination, the term itself. And the scientists told me that no, they don't use this term, but today, because of gaining more awareness of this concept, this has found a seed amongst the scientists. So in the 24th chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika, you'll see how those who assert the philosophical schools which assert some objective existence in things, criticize the Madhyamakas, and then how Madhyamakas respond to their criticism. So we need to read this chapter 24 and also chapter 18. So if you could read these the lines in verse chapter 18 and the chapter 24, you'll be able to understand those of the how things do not have any intrinsic existence because of dependent origination. So it's important to gain insight into emptiness through the understanding of dependent origination. And it's important to even kind of recite these lines from the 24th chapter. So dependent origination and being able to assert both the emptiness and dependent origination without any contradiction is an excellent thing. So on the basis of understanding that things are dependently in terms of arisen in terms of causality, you create the causes for higher rebirth. And Kamalashila also mentions in his commentary to Tattva Samgraha, which was written by his master Chandarakshita. And Kamalashila says that through the understanding of causality, we create the causes for higher rebirth, and through the understanding of dependence in terms of designation, you will create the causes for liberation. So verse number 40, it overcomes all opposing challenges. It's free from contradictions between earlier and later parts. It grants fulfillment of beings' two aims. For this system, my joy increases ever more, and so forth. So on the basis of the teaching of dependent origination, the Buddha leads beings to higher rebirth, which is a temporary goal, and the definite goodness is the ultimate goal. This excellent system, most marvelous. Sometimes some individuals who are not so learned have entangled it in utter confusion, just like the tangled bhavadza grass. Seeing this situation, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones and sought your intention again and again. At such times as I studied the numerous works of both our own, the middle way philosophy, and others' schools, those which are also within the Buddhist fault, the other philosophical systems, my mind become tormented ever more constantly by the network of doubts. So the 70 verses of on emptiness and the 60 stanzas of reasoning are very good texts that we should study, written by Master Nagarjuna. The nightly lily grove of Nagarjuna's treatises, Nagarjuna, whom you prophesied, would unravel your unexalted vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence, illuminated by the garland of lights of Chandra Kirti, Chandra's well-uttered insights, Chandra, whose stainless wisdom orb is full, who glides freely across the scripture's space. So a teacher who teaches through reason is an unexalted teacher, and who through his teaching helps beings to reach, helps them to reach their goal of called enlightenment. So illuminated by and so forth, and who dispels the darkness of extremist hearts, and outshines the constellations of false speakers. When, through my teacher's kindness, I saw this, my mind found a rest at last. And following such a teacher and having become a renunciate, having studied the Conqueror's words not too poorly, this monk who strives in the yogic practices, such is the depth of his reverence to the great seer. Since it is due to my teacher's kindness, I have met with the teaching of the unexalted teacher. I dedicate this virtue towards the cause for all beings to be sustained by sublime spiritual mentors. May the teaching of the beneficent one till world's end be unshaken by the winds of evil thoughts. May it always be filled with those who find conviction in the teacher by understanding the teaching's true nature. So for those who aspire to meditate on emptiness, Master Nagarjuna is a very special teacher. So Mahakala is protector deity of the teaching, and who was relied on by Master Nagarjuna, and so he becomes a very special protector in that sense for those who wish to meditate on emptiness based on the understanding of dependent origination. So this is a short teaching on the text called In Praise of Dependent Origination. So when I was memorizing texts in my childhood, I memorized this particular text one morning. Perhaps it may have taken me 1 hour to memorize this text, and I, of course, am familiar with some of the meaning of this text. And then I also give teaching on it to other people who are interested in it. And I tell people that it would be good for them to memorize and recite this text. So the organizers seems to have published a book. So I'm not going to give the teaching on Buddha Palita commentary. So the book contains the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the fundamental wisdom verses of the Middle Way by Nagarjuna. And there is a commentarial transmission of it. I have received it from Kinori Master, Kondalama Tenzin Gyatsen Rinpoche. So he's always just reading through this Mula Madhyama Kakarika by Nagarjuna. It gives the title in Sanskrit and Tibetan. So a few verses from the beginning of the text were read. If there are no entities which have self, how can there be entities called others? He's not stopped there. So that's all for today. I've been to Jepung and then Garden and then here in Sera for short periods of time. I had a very bad cold earlier in Mundgod and felt very exhausted. So I felt very unwell. So therefore, the original programs had to be changed. So you, of course, live here and pursue your study of philosophy. And then to the lay people, I wish to tell that Buddhism is not only about keep faith alone, but we need to use our intelligence and gain understanding of the teaching in order to be able to weaken our mental afflictions, the disturbing conceptions. We need to use our intelligence to see the reality and also to weaken our selfish attitude, self-centered attitude. It's helpful to practice based on, to do your practices based on developing, cultivating altruism based on Master Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara. So I appreciate the monks and the monastics who engage themselves in the study of, in-depth study of Buddhist philosophy. Oh.